Our school.
The memories of former students and teachers at Luton High School for girls and later Denbigh High School.
There has been a school on the Alexandra Avenue site since 1919.
The Luton Modern School for girls opened with the school buildings being ex-army wooden huts.
These wooden huts were used for the following 11 years.
The huts were eventually replaced by the existing school buildings in 1930.
The school then became the Luton High School for girls.
The new school building was officially opened on the 5th of November 1930 by Her Grace the Duchess of Atholl, MP, DBE. The Duchess was the second woman ever to become an MP.
The Duchess arrived for the opening ceremony. The Duchess was presented with a golden key to unlock the door, but the door would not open, in spite of vigorous shaking. Eventually, the head teacher saved the day and called through the door, "Draw back the bolts." The door had been bolted on the inside.
The new school building was first used in September 1930. There were 413 pupils on roll. In 1944, the government introduced the 11+ examination.
All children aged 11 had to take this exam.
Those that passed went to grammar schools. The Luton High School for girls was a grammar school.
With the introduction of the comprehensive system in 1960s, the requirement to take the 11+ ceased.
The school became Denbigh High School.
Miss Sheldon's school rules were strict. No girl must ever walk more than 2 abreast on the pavement. No girl must ever eat in the street or speak when using public transport to or from school. The rules were generally obeyed. Girls who did not obey could be made to wear a black ribbon of shame on the sleeve of their blouse.
Every year on Empire Day, pupils brought wildflowers to school, which were packed in boxes and sent by train to London. They were distributed to children who attended East End schools who had practically no opportunity to see fresh flowers. The school received thank you letters, and in 1930, one child wrote, "I only wish I could come to Luton and see all these flowers growing in the fields."
The long-awaited school swimming pool was opened in 1934. The pool was open air and didn't have a filtration system. It was soon realized that this was not practical, and money was quickly raised to install filtration by the following summer.
In 1938, an extension was added to the school, and the number of pupils rose to 627. The new wing was built beside the swimming pool and contained a gymnasium block and a junior library.
During the war, there were lots of changes at the school. On the first day of term in September 1939, pupils had to climb ladders in the school hall and stick brown paper tape, known as scrim, across the windows in case they were blown in by a bomb blast.
During air raids, Miss Sheldon, wearing an ARP helmet, marshaled the girls by blowing a bugle. They then had to run across the sports field to the air raid shelters, where they sat on benches but couldn't lean back as the walls ran with water. Miss Sheldon took pride in the fact that the building could be cleared within 3 minutes.
During the war, the hockey pitch was dug up and used to grow potatoes, and an allotment was started in the school grounds to grow salad crops, onions, marrows, and etc., which were used for school meals.
In 1962, the new science block was opened, and also the transformed swimming pool, which had been converted to an indoor heated pool between 1960 and 1962.
The staff and girls were divided into 5 houses named after famous women: Boadicea, Grace Darling, Elizabeth Fry, Helen Keller, and Florence Nightingale. In 1934, 2 more houses were added, named after Mary Curie and Elizabeth Garrick Anderson.
Patricia Doreen Gillespie now, but I was born Patricia Doreen Evans. And I was brought up in the Rothsay Road area of Luton, and I went to Christ Church, also known as Buxton Road, infant and junior school, which I absolutely loved. And from there, I passed 11+. This was 1947, and I was at the school until 1954. So 1947 marked the first year, the beginning of Mrs. Evans' first year as the headmistress. And In the July, we went up to be invited beforehand. We were invited to go up to the school with a parent. And Mum took me. We sat in this big hall, and Mrs. Evans on the stage explained to us a lot about the school and what was required of us. And then we were each invited to go up onto the stage, and she shook our hand. And when it came to me, she said, she said, Patricia Evans. You have a very worthy surname, she said. Live up to it. We started off by going to school on the bus. We went then, later on, as we got older, we went on our cycles. And it's only in later years that I've realised that Mrs. Richardson, who was the head cook, was obviously still handicapped by rationing.
My name is Shirley Hobbs, and I've lived in Luton all my life, and I'm proud to say that my parents were from Luton as well, so I've got quite a history about the town, and I am now 85 years old. I went to Christ Church School. In those days, now I'm talking about 1949, everybody in the town had to sit an exam to see which school they were going to go to when they were 11. This exam, which used to be called either the Scholarship or 11 Plus, and there were 4 girls in my class, including me, who passed this 11 Plus exam to go to what was then called the Luton Girls High School. And so there was 150 girls starting that school in September 1949.
My name is Joyce Bomber. I was Joyce Bradley when I went to the high school in 1959. When I was at Denbigh, I was obviously known by my maiden name, which is Gillian Olliott, which is a bit of a mouthful. I was at Denbigh from September 1966 to July 1971. I was a first year of what we called the comprehensive system. The reason I went to Denbigh rather than to Chorney Girls High School, which was where most of my friends went, was because my father had been at Denbigh.
And I've got a twin sister whose name is Sarah. We both went to Denbigh High School. We were there 1973 to 1978.
My name's Mark Barrett. I went to school I left in 1979, so I guess I was there in 1975 to 79. I was in Scott's House, as it was then. I don't know if they'd still do that sort of thing, but there was girls' houses and boys' houses.
I'm Kerry McCarthy. I'm the Labour Member of Parliament for Bristol East and have been since 2005, but I was born in Luton and went to Norton Road Primary School and went from there to Denbigh.
My name is Shirin Hassan, and I went to Denbigh High School in the 1980 to 1985.
My name's Rachel Hopkins, and I'm Member of Parliament for Luton South, and I went to Denbigh High School between 1983 and 1988. I went up to Denbigh from William Austin Junior School.
We were in the 3rd year carrying bouquets of flowers, which we used to collect on Empire Day. We used to bring them into school. They were boxed up and they were sent to London schools.
And this little girl's name was Daphne. I have kept friends with Daphne from that day when I met her. I'm still in touch with her. I spoke to her on the phone yesterday.
So I came from Farley Juniors, and first impressions of the school was it was very posh. It was a very big building, much bigger than the school I'd been at. Long stone-floored corridors and lots of wood. We all had to have a uniform, and it was very strict. We had hats. You had to have a navy coat. You couldn't have a coloured coat. You had to have the school tunic, and you had to have a shoe bag to put your shoes in. And when you got to school in the morning, you took your outdoor shoes off and put indoor shoes on. Did games in a white cotton polo shirt, an old school jumper so that you could take it off when you came in, and navy knickers. We did not have shorts. We only were allowed to wear thick navy knickers. We went through to year 3 where we had to make our O-level choices, and that was very much dictated by what could be offered. So, for example, you had to make some hard choices between history and geography. You couldn't do both. Certainly, if you wanted to do art, you couldn't do art and most of the academic subjects. You were very much being parted. So those that I think had the chance or the ability to move on to A-levels and university were being encouraged. The others perhaps just sort of moved slightly to one side. I think the one thing I do remember as an anecdote was that the girls, when you got to, I think it was year 3, were expected to serve in the canteen at lunchtime. And by that I mean that you were allocated a number of tables, and rather than have everybody rushing to go and collect their food, the waitresses, of which I was one, had to take food to your set number of tables, which the boys didn't have to do, just the girls.
And Sarah and I enjoyed the debating society. I remember we used to have to start off, it's all very formal, so Mr. Chairman or Madam Chairman, and then we had to introduce the subject. And what I loved about debating is that you take one side of an argument and you don't necessarily believe in it. You may be something that you don't believe in, but you have to make the case for it. And then the other side makes their case, and then there was a vote. So you can see if you've actually managed to persuade anyone, or if you haven't, at least to see where the opinion lies in the room. And just to be able to present the other side of the argument, even if you're not persuaded by it, at the very least, you can think about why someone has beliefs which you don't share. I told my sister about memories of school times. One thing that she mentioned was the IRA bomb threats and the bombings. So the IRA bombed various places in the early 70s. So there were these bomb scares. And I remember we had these evacuations. There was one at school.
My first day, I remember my first day at Denbigh High, and I found it quite impressive. And all the wood in the kind of the lobby near the headmaster's office, and the hall with the big banners of the houses hanging down the sides, and it felt like you were going somewhere really sort of important and established. We used to have things called house points, which were kind of, if you've done well, you got a house point. So it's like, oh, I got a house point. And I don't know what we did with them, but we had these house points.
I think the sheer size, I mean, I'm not very tall now, but I was very small then. And I actually remember I was 4'1" because my best friend was 5'1". And that's the main thing, is just how big, because you've got people that are 16-year-olds there. And I remember feeling very small.
I was a minority. I did get bullied in my junior school, and I learned to speak English, and then I started to fit in and made friends. When I came to Denbigh High School, it was a very multicultural, diverse school. Although I was a small Bengali minority within the school.
The building had a one-way system. You had to walk all the way along the bottom corridor and all the way along the top in one direction. So if you had a lesson in a classroom at one end of the corridor downstairs, you still had to walk all the way up the stairs, all the way along the top corridor, back down the stairs again to get to practically the room next door. And you were not allowed to talk.
When I was at school, my friendship group was very mixed and diverse. My friends came from a range of family backgrounds and sort of ethnicities. And one of the things, I think we were in that transitional phase in terms of recognising cultural and religious differences, maybe.
And one of the benefits, I think, of moving into Luton Girls High School, as I said, was broadening the curriculum. So, for example, we had the chance to do, and I did it, economic and public affairs, which taught us all about government, how the country was run, economics, and also speech and drama, which was pretty new to us.
I think again it was designed to try to help us learn to speak properly, but also in terms of communication skills.
When I started, the head of the lower school was a lady called Miss Flaherty, but she is one of the people I've remembered all my life from the high school. She was a role model that I used when I became a head of year. If you made a spelling mistake, you had to cross it out and write it in over the top, and then write it 3 times in the back of the book. If you got that wrong, you had to write it 100 times in the back of the book.
So my favourite subject probably was English literature, and that was down in no small part to the teacher, who I really thought was fantastic. It was Mr. Carter. It's quite elderly. In fact, he taught my father. But he was brilliant because he made, for me, literature come alive, particularly as we were working towards our O-levels.
School was very structured. So we'd go to school, we would face the blackboard. It was very much an exam-based system then, so there wasn't continuous assessment as part of the exam process.
I'd say I mostly enjoyed my lessons, but I did get quite bored at times. And I think that's just a reflection of back then it was very much teacher writes things on the board, people copy it down. There wasn't much independent learning. I don't think there was any sense of being pushed forward to do things by any particular teacher.
Subject-wise, in my time at school, we could choose any subjects we wanted to in year 10 to study for 10 and 11, and at that time we did O-levels instead of GCSEs. At my time at school, mostly people didn't go on to further education or even colleges. They did their O-levels and then they would go into work. I was a minority going into college. Didn't have any computer studies or such. There was typewriting lessons, so I learnt to type on a manual typewriter. And we had one computer in the whole school, and it was a huge machine.
I had some really good teachers. I was lucky. I was quite good at school. I was, a bit of a swot really. But there were some teachers who really found interests of mine, and I worked together. So a couple which probably are really relevant to what I do now as an MP is my drama teacher, Mr. Taylor, particularly through the 3rd, 4th and 5th years. He was really keen on getting all kids involved in drama, in storytelling, in thinking about things, being creative, understanding the world. And we did some a really great end of year piece for our class who was studying drama based around Martin Luther King. And I think that was really interesting, talking about civil rights and human rights through studying Martin Luther King through drama. And then similarly, in my 4th and 5th year, I studied government and politics, GCSE, and we had Mrs. Devine, who was our teacher there. And she was great, and she very much encouraged us to think about the world, to understand structures and institutions like Parliament, like government, and I really enjoyed politics. I come from a political family, but actually studying it in that sense, alongside other children, so we all had an opportunity to think about democracy and those sorts of things, was really good. And I found photos of our school trip to Parliament in about 1987-88. And it's really fascinating looking back to a place where I now go to work.
And corporal punishment was rife at Denbigh. The head teacher, headmaster at the time, was Mr. Whittaker. He was really hot on discipline. And he expected very high standards from his pupils and also from the teaching staff. So he would walk around with his university gown.
Discipline at school was quite old-fashioned. I mean, we still had the cane back then, and people were caned. But I think at that point it was only the headmaster or the deputy head that could do that. With the PE teachers, I think there was a slipper. He just got beaten with a slipper. And then there were the stuff like detention, liturgy to go outside and pick up all the empty crisp packets and various other things like that.
In terms of how you get the cane, what did you have to do to get the cane? Well, I guess it was one of those things as a progression. So you get lines, you might get a detention, or you get the cane. And the cane was for probably repeated misdemeanor. And a misdemeanor would include, I think the favourite word was insolence. And insolence was basically being disrespectful and cheeky to a teacher, but not cheeky in a funny way, but more disrespectful. And certainly there was no swearing, and swearing at a teacher, that would have been something that would have been would deserve getting, or would have been seen as being worthy of getting a cane. The cane.
When you got into the fourth year, you had the opportunity to stand as what they called sub-prefects. So these were the prefects who would take over when the fifth years were doing their O-levels, so that the discipline of the school could be maintained. And so when fourth year came around, I was made a sub-prefect. And then at the end of the fourth year, you were selected to be prefects and or head girl, head boy, and deputy head girl. In the fifth year, I was made head girl.
In the corridors were the prefects stood in the corridors, and they could give out lines. Not that they really did, but they could make sure that people were quiet. Along there were senior prefects stood. So there were 3 senior prefects. There's a deputy head girl and boy, and the senior and the head boy and head girl. And as it happened, when it came to our turn, my sister Sarah, now she was the head girl and I was the deputy, despite the fact that, in fact, I'm 3 minutes older than Sarah.
In terms of disciplinary regime, when I was in primary school, corporal punishment was still in existence. So we would get the odd tap from the head teacher with a ruler on our hands. And that was one of the things that was still happening. But when I came into high school, behaviour punishment was dealt with by detentions, suspension from school, and in extreme cases, being expelled from school.
Yes, I always wanted to be a teacher, and when I left in 1954, I went to Manchester University, and I studied French honours with Spanish. And after that, I went on to London and did my postgraduate certificate in education. I first taught in Hornsey High School in London, and after 2 years there, an opening came at the high school, and so in September 1961, I went back to my old school to teach French and Spanish.
My father, from the time I was about 14 or so, said, what are you going to do, Shirley, with your life? Dad said, well, I think it would be a good idea for you to learn shorthand and typing. So for 2 years, I went to Saturday morning school learning shorthand and typing. A few months before this July that I was going to leave, I was offered this job for me leaving in the following July as a junior clerk in an office in the hospital.
In 1964, after I'd done GCE, I went straight into the sixth form, which was at the high school. I took 3 A-levels to begin with, 3 A-level courses. I took English and biology and chemistry. Eventually, I took A-level English, A-level biology. So I went to Nottingham to train, and so I came back to Luton, and I became just an ordinary teacher at Chalney Girls' School. After a year at Chalney Girls, the opportunity came up to go on to be a head of year there. And then Lee Manor was going to open up on Marsh Farm, and I applied for that job, did get the job.
After sitting my O-levels, I left in July 1971. I opted to go to sixth form college, and I chose English literature, French and history with Russian as an option. And I moved on to sixth form college in September 71. Was there for 2 years. Took my A-levels, applied to university, got a place. Unfortunately, I couldn't take my place up. In those days, although university education was free, your parents were still required to underwrite the grant application. And my parents decided that they weren't in that financial position at that time to do that, and therefore I couldn't go. I found my way into the civil service, where I joined in October 73. In the end, I joined the Ministry of Defence. I had a very rewarding career for over 40 years. I retired in 2020, so I was invited in 2022 to stand for St Albans District Council as a local councillor for Harpenden. And so I found myself learning new skills again, even though I'd been in the civil service. Nothing quite prepares you for local politics. So this year, I was asked, would I also stand for Harpenden Town Council? I was elected.
In terms of school being a path forward, one of the subjects I really enjoyed, at which I took an O-level in, was economics. And I've always been, that really sparked off an interest which I've continued to this day, and was a path to my future career. For my A-levels, I did French, economics and politics. When it came to choice of university, and we were the first generation of our family to go to university, my sister Sarah, she'd been a member of the St John's Ambulance from the young age of about 8, and so she'd always liked the idea of medicine. So she went to Southampton Medical School and did a 1-year conversion course, and then she studied medicine and qualified as a doctor. But my father saw an advert in the newspaper for Midland International, HSBC today, and there was a course where you could go and work for a year pre-university. And then I do a degree in banking and international finance at the City University in London. So I applied for that and was accepted to that. So what happened was I worked for a year before university in London, and then I went to university, did banking and international finance. And then after that, I got a job in the City in London, and subsequently worked in investment banking for 30 years. Most of that was in that career was in London. I'm now living in Sydney in Australia. My sister Sarah moved here 30 years ago, so she's living in Sydney.
I think the last 3 years of being at Denbigh was all about the exams, the O-levels, and I was lazy, and so I didn't really put any work in. So I didn't do very well in my exams. I got my art. I'm not going to venture beyond. I got my art, but I did get a few others. But I got my art, which was what I was after. That got me into art college, and I did a foundation there, and then I went on to do an apprenticeship in design for print, which was really good because I got to use all the equipment. I got to print stuff on machines, and it was the real world. So I learned a lot from the real world. And then from there, I went on. I worked in various other graphic design places. And now I run my own design agency.
Did my O-levels, went to Luton Sixth Form College, where I did English, politics and history. And I think the thing that maybe I was always interested in politics, just in a talking about it way. So we had an O-level economics and public affairs, where you were taught the very basics of economics and how government worked. And I know that I enjoyed that quite a lot, and really enjoyed my politics A-level at sixth form, and I ended up getting obsessed with Russian literature just at the moment that we were due to be making choices. So I was being pushed to do English and apply for I did actually do the Cambridge entrance exam and all that, but I suddenly decided I really wanted to do Russian, and ended up at Liverpool doing Russian and politics. And I know it sounds like this such a trivial thing, but it was part. I wanted to go to Manchester because of the music scene, but you couldn't do Russian from scratch, and Liverpool was the place you could do Russian from scratch and had the second best music scene. I left university 1986 with a degree in Russian and politics, which didn't equip me for very much because it was the height of the Cold War. We weren't speaking to the Russians, and my Russian wasn't good enough to speak to them anyway. So I ended up working at South Bed's Magistrates Court because they were offering a job, and it said opportunity to study law. Eventually, qualified as a lawyer and worked in the City of London for quite a while. So it was a sort of slightly strange trajectory in that before I qualified, I was working, it was very much within the criminal justice system, and you had these sort of kids that were basically, you could sort of tell the moment you saw them what they were destined for, and they'd come in for criminal damage, and then the next day it'd be stealing cars, and the next day it'd be robbery. And you used to read about them later in the papers, that they'd were then getting the 10-year sentences a bit. But then, it was when I went to law college, people were being offered trainee contracts in city firms, and somehow ended up going down that path, worked at some big financial institutions, and then stepped away from it all because I was getting more and more involved in politics. And then fast forward to the 1992 election, I'm living in Luton, having strong feelings, that's when I got involved, and it just escalated very, very quickly. I got very involved at a voluntary level, started doing some national things, and eventually somehow ended up being selected in Bristol, and here I am 19 years later.
So I finished studying at Denbigh High School in 1985, taking O-level exams in history, English, maths, biology, chemistry, and I did exams in typing, office practice, I think it was. And after doing my O-levels, I went to Luton Sixth Form College to study secretarial courses because I wanted to be a secretary. So I came back to work at Denbigh High School as a clerical assistant in reception, and I also worked in the EMAS department, which is like the support department now. And slowly and gradually I moved working into the classroom, and where I'm still working, supporting pupils with their learning. And after I came back to work here, I wanted to further my studies and my qualifications, so I studied with the Open University, and I did a foundation education degree.
So I spent 5 years at Denbigh, first year to 5th year. You make your choices for your GCSEs in your 3rd year. And my year, who took GCSEs in 1988, that was the first year of GCSE examinations. We took 8 GCSEs, English, Maths, and I took physics for my science. I did French because I really enjoyed French. Alongside, I did government politics and technical drawing, or graphic design, I think it was called then. Coming out of Denbigh, I got my 8 GCSEs and I went to do A-levels at Sixth Form College. I did government and politics, French and economics at A-level. And then 2 years later, coming out of Sixth Form College, I went off to university at University of Leicester, and I studied French and politics. So after university, I did my first permanent job was in London. I joined the civil service, and so I spent most of my career in the wider civil service, some of which is working for direct departments, and others were at arm's length from government. I want to support my hometown. I want to support the people in my hometown where I've lived basically all my life. So I was a local councillor, and I've been politically active because decisions are made through institutions and in government, outside of government, but through political institutions. So I thought I got involved in being a local councillor because decisions were made about our town, but also to help people, and it's that dual role. And then basically an opportunity arose that at the next election in the Luton South area, the Labour Party would need a candidate. And so having been active in my local Labour Party, having been a local councillor, and then wanting to put my hat in the ring with our party to become the candidate, there's a sort of structured process to be selected to be the candidate. But the biggest selection is getting elected, and obviously I was very privileged to be elected as the MP for Luton South in 2019.
What I would like to say is that at the age of 11, starting at the high school changed my life. If I had not gone to the high school at that time, my life probably would have followed a completely different path.
The good thing is, from my point of view, is that I have kept friends with Daphne from that day when I met her, and I've also traced many of the 150 girls who started in 1949.
I think the thing I would say about the high school was it gave you a lot of skills for life. You didn't just come out with A levels of academic qualifications. There was quite a lot of non-curricular activity.
I look back on my education and the ethos of my school and the culture, as much as not just what you can do for yourself, but what you can do for other people.
In terms of when I think about my school days and Denbigh, and I haven't thought of them for quite some time, but what I do carry to this day, and I would strongly value, is education, and the way that for me it's opened up lots of fantastic opportunities.
I remember it being a good school, safe school, a successful school. It was a well thought of school at the time. I think Denbigh was always a well thought of school, and I've got some fond memories of it.
So I think since I left Denbigh, I've sort of heard very good things about the academic performance there. It's become much, the demographics have changed, I think, but there just seems to be a very different ethos there. I think it's fair to say when I was there, it wasn't regarded as one of the better schools in Luton.
Luton has been very good for my family since we've migrated from Bangladesh. And also Denbigh High School, giving us first-class education. And then my siblings also came here, and they all did extremely well. And my brother is now a GP. One of my sister is an assistant head at a local primary school. And my other sister is a pharmacist, and my brother is a solicitor. And my children, they also came here, and my son, he graduated in computer science and is working in IT. My daughter is at UCL, University College London, studying pharmacy. So yes, so proud of being a Lutonian.
So my school days had good days and some difficult days. You know, I was lucky, I was quite clever, I got on with school, got on with class, but because I was quite clever and got on at school and got in class, I was sort of bullied sometimes for being a smart girl. But that didn't put me off what to do in life. In fact, it made me a bit stronger, but particularly standing up against others who are not necessarily wanting to do right by others themselves. And actually that sort of standing up for yourself and standing up for others, I actually reflect on my experience at school. You know, I know schools change over time, and Denbigh's a fantastic school now, outstanding achievement, I know. But you know, 35 years ago when I was there, it was a good school, but like all schools, stuff happens. And I think nowadays, schools are much more aware of when children and young people are being bullied and have strategies to deal with it. I think a lot more went on sort of behind the scenes, down corridors in our school that often teachers weren't aware of.
production of this video has been funded by the Beds and Luton Community Foundation, Luton Rising Small Grant Fund and the Heritage Fund. And of course, Luton High School for Girls and Denbigh High School for helping the individuals in this film becoming the people they are today.